This short break, I would like to welcome Professor Charlotte Rouechet. I hope that I'm pronouncing correctly the accent at the end of your. Sorry, we're not listening. We're not listening to you. You have to unmute. Sorry.
Mute. Many people forget that accent because you can't, if you put it in a computer, nothing happens.
Okay, so I'm pronouncing correctly.
Yeah, perfect.
Right. So Professor Charlotte Rouechet, our second keynote speaker, is a Professor Emeritus of Digital Hellenic Studies in the Department of Classics in King's College. She has a particular interest in text analysis, inscribed or in manuscripts of the Roman, Late Antique and Byzantine periods. Professor Rouechet is interested in the interface between digital humanities and classical and Byzantine studies, exploring how digital tools and publications can break down barriers between disciplines and between scholars. I'm very happy to welcome her on the digital stand, since unfortunately it has not been possible for all of us to meet in person in Athens, and we're all very much looking forward to listening to your talk entitled Opening or Closing, What Does It Mean to Own Data?
Thank you very much. It's a great disappointment not to be in Athens at this moment. I would love to be here, but there is another side to it, because actually 3 weeks ago I broke my arm, and last week I had to go into hospital and it was operated on. So in fact, if we had been meeting in person, I wouldn't have been able to come. So in fact, the virtual solution turns out to be a blessing. And it interests me because I think I was looking at the abstract which I wrote, and which I wrote back at the beginning of the year. And I was thinking, everybody's understanding of the digital and the virtual has been transformed during this year. And many of our colleagues who couldn't understand why we do what we do are suddenly, they've discovered they can't go to the library. And their whole approach is changing very fast. And at the same time, it's very exciting listening to your projects. I haven't listened to everything because I'm still a bit fragile. My working day has to be quite short, but there is so much happening. When I started doing digital things back in sort of late 1990s, 2000, it was quite a lonely world. There were not very many people in our area of the humanities exploring all these possibilities. So now I shall share my screen. There we are. Yep, that's what I want. Share. Good. Hope you can see that. So when we started, I just thought we might think about boundaries and limits, because I work with inscriptions, and inscriptions have often been used to create limits. And we're living in a world where people in many countries, particularly my own, are very busy putting up boundaries and limits and closing things at the very same time as it is becoming easier than ever before to be together and to work together. And the contrast is really dramatic between the political, social resistance to distance and to outsiders, and the technological fact that we are engaged more than ever before. And I want you to think about that and what it means and where we're going. Now, I started in a very simple way because I wanted to record inscriptions. And the challenge of producing a great big book with all the photographs that we have nowadays and all the material and all the things we want to say is became unreal. So I started for very boring, practical reasons to use digital tools as a means of publication, with little idea of the journey that I was going on. There was just all this material. So we began, and some of you will remember objects that look like this. When you started, there were these new computers, and it was very exciting. And their great virtue was that they could deal with quantity, lots and lots of stuff. And they could help with organization, and they could help you find things. But what you have to remember, and it's very important when you look at the projects which began in the 1990s and the 2000s still, was that this was a closed world. The items were contained. They were, in a way, like very big books. They were, quite a lot of our thinking was formed at that point, where there were these separate islands of knowledge. And so our first publication, partly because we wanted to explore this, we took a book and created a web publication because we thought it would be useful for people who were very, very suspicious about anything that was online to see see how the two things compared. They can take the book and they can take the digital publication and they can compare them. Now, we published that online. We could have published it on a CD. It's still a contained item, a self-contained item. So to that extent, it is the next step in a journey which starts, as people always say, with the printing press, which is true. But the further example of that is actually photography, which I think we sometimes forget because it's not dealing with words, but it is about being able to reproduce information and therefore being able to communicate it more widely. And it's interesting to consider that the very first, the Gutenberg Bible, actually imitated manuscripts. So they decorated the printed text. And it was therefore still very expensive. But it reminds me in a way of a PDF, which sits there imitating or replicating print, and therefore is not so frightening. It's still controllable. And then everything changed. When back at the beginning of the 2000s, at the end of the 1990s, we were still putting publications onto CD-ROM. at the beginning of the 2000s, we start putting academic publications out online. And that is, of course, a huge transformation. And what it meant was something that certainly I myself didn't fully understand when it was happening. Because if an online publication, if a CD is like a book and a contained online publication is like a book, when you put your book online, I always have this picture of the library with all the books sitting next to one another, as if one book could stretch its hand out and touch the next book. And the person, of course, who understood this was Tim Berners-Lee, who pointed out that to make the web be what it ought to be, you need to have linked open data. The benefit of the web is that we can interact with each other's work in a completely new way, or possibly an old way. Sorry for the misspelling there. I can enrich my conventional edition, but on the web, I can connect things with what you might think of as dynamic footnotes. And there's a big difference here, because when you write a book, you have lots of lovely footnotes. When you read a book, when you get to a footnote, do you always stand up, walk across the room, and fetch the book to which the reference has been made to check whether you agree? I'm sure you do, but I don't. If it's just a matter of clicking on a link, you do. And so you are actually already raising the critical level, because you're going to be more careful, you're more likely to be checked more carefully by your reader, simply because it's practically easier for your reader to do so. And there are aspects like this which make me believe that as we settle into it, that online publication should produce higher standards of scholarship than before. So if you take an apparatus criticus, here's a nice inscription. I forget when we photographed, yes, 1975, we found this stone. But actually, it had been copied 300 to 200 years earlier, and the manuscript of the notes from the man who copied it is now online at the British Library. So I can now, in my edition, point people to the stone and my record of the stone, and I can point people directly, rather than just having a bibliographic reference, I can offer people the opportunity to go and look themselves at what the early traveller saw. So that kind of raising of standards is very, very important. And it seems to me that it's one of the key reasons why we should be committing ourselves to later. I use this slide because it was made by one of my colleagues and it's already out of date. There's lots more stuff. But there are increasing possibilities when you cite a text to point at that actual text, and when you're editing a text, to point at the manuscript from which that text has come. And so a lot of things which we expected people to take on trust, I say that it's like this, so you have to believe me. Those things now are increasingly open for people to examine. And that's important and exciting and frightening. And the other thing is, we have a completely unpredictably different audience. We cannot know who is going to see what we publish. And therefore we have to think very hard about clarity, about explaining things which we might not explain if we knew that only a few specialist academics were going to look at what we wrote. And this is a particular challenge for us in the humanities. The scientists don't have the same kind of challenge, but we really need to think very hard about our wider audience. And therefore, if you write a sentence in which you mention Pericles, it's not enough to imagine that your reader in China knows who that is. So you have to think very, very hard about how to give people the opportunity to discover what you're talking about. So I think users expect much more context nowadays, more illustration, all that kind of thing. They expect a need disambiguation. What Alexandria do you mean? Which one? And they expect more transparency about what's going on. So for us, by 2009, it was when we put out our next bunch of publications. We put out some publications from Libya. It was possible to link to an online gazetteer of places. And place, as we'll be hearing again tomorrow, I think, place as a focus for disambiguation and for linking is very, very important, because human beings have spent a lot of time in the last few hundred years finding ways to identify physical location. A lot of that work has been done. At the very opposite end of the scale, probably the most difficult thing of all is what we heard about this afternoon, which is talking about people, because that's really, really difficult. And when you say Alexander, who do you mean? That sort of question. But place is a very, very good place to start. But nothing, it's important to remember that in this world of gazetteers, nothing there's not some wonderful, absolute, worldwide, fixed point to which everybody with which everybody will agree. And if you look at the Pleiades Gazetteer of the ancient world, it's absolutely excellent. I've been working recently on more material from Libya, and it has lots and lots of places in it which aren't in, my inscriptions come from lots of places which are not in Pleiades and are not going to be. And there's a lot of room for, the important thing about gazetteers is that they should communicate with one another. When I talk about this place, I am referring to the same place that you are talking about. We did some work on a gazetteer of Cyprus, and I would say that anyone in a Greek-speaking country knows that any alphabetic variation creates inconsistent transliteration. So that toponyms are very, very difficult when there's more than one alphabet. So again, really basic engineering, basic agreement on how to link geographical data together is really useful. And it then allows you to offer people the sort of information that they want about when they're reading your work. You say this stone is at Cyrene, where's that? So what we've seen this year more than ever before, people have come to see how important collaboration is, how important sharing data is. And even people ignorant of ignorant of research and of the academic process it's been fascinating watching people engage with the fact that that data exist and they have to be taken seriously, even though some politicians are capable of ignoring them. So all research, all our scholarship depends on connecting, that's those footnotes, on collaborating, even though in the humanities, we don't always notice that we're doing it. Archaeologists find it much easier because they all have to collaborate, and sharing. And that's never been easier in practical terms. It's incredibly easy physically to share in a way it's never been before. And at the same time, for all sorts of political and social reasons, it's becoming more difficult. It's worth remembering what happened when printing was invented. The governments of the day said, well, what we need is copyright. We're doing this to protect the authors. But they were actually doing it so that the government could keep an eye on what was being published. And there is a fundamental tension between authorities and the sharing of knowledge. And now that people talk more and more about the value of data, the financial value of data, that becomes even more of a problem. So in the 17th century, you see in England the company of stationers. Sounds very innocuous. A trade organization of people who printed books, but they were given licenses to print books and to issue copyright. And the enormous prices that we pay for books nowadays are, the latest consequence of all of that. And that turned them into commercial enterprises. And it was the poet and writer John Milton in the 17th century who says, you mustn't try to turn knowledge, you mustn't take the knowledge, mark it and license it like cloth and like wool, because of course at this time wool is one of the major exports of Britain. So that he's saying knowledge is not something you can just put into a package and charge money for. And it's completely modern observation, completely modern. So what does it mean to say that we own data or own knowledge? I'll sort of blur over that data knowledge difference. Now, we haven't always agreed what you can own. We no longer believe that you can own another human being, although we believed that pretty recently. That change is, and there are people in the world who probably still believe it. But it is a reminder that all this language of ownership is extremely vague and not thought through. What do we mean? What do we actually, in the modern world, it tends to mean it is a thing for which I can ask money. But what is ownership? What do you own a picture of yourself? There are cultures where people refuse to be photographed because they think that to be photographed will take something away from them. That always seems to me pretty good thinking. Not a stupid idea. And if they do own your image, look what they can then do. Images as a means of control, well, whether it's turning on your iPhone or walking down the street in China, that's another aspect. So we have to think very hard when we say mine. And when you I don't know. Then there's this list that Google will give you of what your data, is my street address, in what sense is it mine? I don't own the street. I don't own the address. I live in a house which has that address. So it's useful to remember how very, very vague we are in talking about these things. And here, something which is very relevant to all of us: who owns the image of an object? There's the object created by some ancient artisan. There's the little girl who lives in the house. Does she own it? Does this professor in the 1930s own the image? What do we mean when we say we own an image? I mean, I just don't know. I think we've spoken, because it hasn't been an issue, we've spoken about it in a very lazy way. And for you, a question: what does it mean to own antiquities? It certainly means to be responsible for them. But then you're responsible for your children. Do you own your children? We have a slightly different set of verbs. More likely they own you, in the case of children. The technology is making it easier and easier to share information. There's a slight problem, which is that not all humanities scholars actually want to share what they have, or only very much on their own terms. And so again, this sense of whatever their data are, whatever it is of ownership comes in. So why would you do it? You do it because it enables you to produce more, give better, fuller, richer information. That's a plus, in my view. You can disseminate better. You can reach more people. And that's becoming, you can reach people all over the world. And when you publish something online, you get responses that you never expect from people you don't expect. Much more difficult for academics. Do you get any respect from your colleagues? Humanists don't like putting URLs in their footnotes, and they still think that. And so a very good example of this, which was published in 2012, is that when they referred to my publication of Aphrodisias in late antiquity, they although this is an online publication of theirs, they referred to the paper book, not to the online publication, which I think is just reflects academic habit. It's just what people are used to doing. So there are serious problems of esteem it's a risky thing for younger people to do. And somebody said to me ages ago, they said, well, you'd better do this because you're old enough. So it's an advantage of age. It doesn't matter what you do. So there are questions, but that is changing, and it's changing quite fast. And institutions like the National Research Centre are very, very important in giving esteem and respectability to digital publication. So you want to be acknowledged, but I think the real answer is, if you don't publish online open access, nobody is going to read it. That's becoming increasingly true. It's going to be ignored. Now, I mean, this is taking time, but that's the way things are going. So the challenge is, you have put your stuff out in this fluid and unstable form. I want people to know what I have contributed to something which may then be taken and used and changed and modified. And so well, our challenge to the computer scientists is to make provenance detectable and ineradicable. And our challenge to the humanists is to get these people sitting on appointment committees who've only ever written books to be prepared to consider young people who've only published online. At the moment, it's quite risky to go to an interview with all your work on a USB and hand it to the people behind the table. That's not their idea of how things should be. On the provenance thing, work is in hand, and it's Tim Berners-Lee as himself who is currently working on a project at MIT to enable people to watermark their own work so that they will get the respect that that deserves. Because we have to break down, if we want to open, we have to acknowledge what the barriers are. We have to acknowledge why people are frightened of doing it, and we have to help them to deal with it. And the final argument is the question of sustainability. And this is a question people have been asking me for 20 years. What about sustainability? And it is one of the most difficult. We have to have some answer to people who say, well, won't it all just disappear? Look, books are reliable. The immediate response to that is the reason why books survive is not because they're on paper. Look what happens to manuscripts. The reason books survive is because there are many copies. So it's the multiple copy aspect that's important, not the intrinsic environment. The manuscripts the manuscripts are lost because there's only one of the manuscript. When it's gone, it's gone. There are arguments. The work I'm doing at the moment on material from Libya is publishing a great deal of material which probably nobody is going to see again, and therefore making available the richest possible account of that material with the kind of wealth that's really only possible online is an exercise in conservation. But the best way, the best guarantee that your work is going to be sustained is if it's used and reused. So comply with standards such as the BBT, which we heard about yesterday, and all that work on standards, which sounds terribly like engineering, rather hard graft. But there's an awful lot of that really basic work that needs doing to make it possible for people to work together and to make it possible for material to become an essential part of the ecosystem of knowledge, because then it will be sustained. I also think that all these governments who are so keen to control what we do, and universities and other such people, have got a wonderful job in all of this. Rather than imposing copyright, what they can be is the people who sustain the sites and make sure that they're available. The cost is very low. One of the interesting things about digital publishing is that the costs are very low, but there are no costs. And it's oddly difficult to get people to make that transfer across. You'll still have to put some money into this, but infinitely less than ever before. And various things are developing, consortia of libraries, all kinds of things, all sorts of approaches to this are developing. And libraries have a very important role to play. In my mind, libraries are going to sort of merge with publishers. That may be the future. So understanding what's happening is really, really important. Those of us who work on history always ask these questions of our sources. We always ask, who is it? Who is this person? how does he know what he's telling me and what he's telling me? Now, we were all trained to do that because we're all historians, but actually these are skills that every single citizen needs, and particularly now out in the great ocean of the web. And I was thinking when we were listening to the story of history in a box, it's a perfect example of the kind of thing that we need to be doing. We need to be helping people, ordinary people, to see the processes by which our outcomes have been created, rather than, aren't I brilliant? Profoundly undermining, I hope, to the authority of the academic, because it's about time the authority of professors was undermined. But the important thing is to say, don't admire me and just believe what I say. Understand the processes and the hard work that I've done in order to be able to say this. And I do think that in this regard, the research that we do is deeply relevant to the experience of individual citizens in our countries. Trust is very, very important. And we are seeing what's happening in societies which are losing trust. And it's very important that we should reinforce belief, give people a sense of how to trust and on what basis to trust. And one of the things about trust, of course, is that if I link to your website, it is in some ways an expression of my trust in you. I think it's worth pointing out what you do. And so trust is more important than ever in this fluid world, but we need to be thinking about it very much, and we need to be encouraging trust as I say, as part of this whole ecosystem of knowledge which we can now share. And so linked data are very, very important. As I say, we're living in a world where people are trying to separate us from one another. And our leaders have done that for, millennia. It's always a good strategy for the individual leader to separate people from other people. And what we have to be doing is constantly resisting that. But the crucial thing is that using linked data is not about centralizing control. It's not for nothing that the World Wide Web is called the web. It's about connection and linking, and it's not about one ring to bind them all. And I think listening to the various presentations that we've had, it seems to me absolutely crucial at this moment that you all should be ensuring the maximum engagement from all the work that you're doing with all the other stuff that's going on out there. Because there is so much afoot. Suddenly, from a world where there were no digital humanities projects, there are now thousands. And the challenge now is to develop efficient systems of communication between us all to ensure that we benefit as much as possible from each other's experience. There is no threat. It's not oh, well, if you're doing this, then I can't. It's not like that. Everyone has got something to offer. It's not the publisher won't publish my book because you've written a book on the same topic. That doesn't apply in this world. Here's my view of this, and here's your view of it. And there's room for it all online. And I would strongly suggest that you might find it useful to go to a workshop in this new world where one can just go wherever one wants, anywhere in the world at no cost. I would suggest that you consider going online to this online conference in December, which is part of an international series, which has been looking precisely at how historians can use linked open data. And I think that you could possibly even present, there's time yet, to present some of the work that's been presented during this conference. Just get out there, because there may be, you might be working on, say, Venetian prosopography, and there might be somebody doing something very relevant on Chinese prosopography, because the material is totally different, but the questions very often turn out to be the same. It's very unsettling for us all, but we can learn from people we never expected to learn from, which is unsettling, but very exciting. So I very much hope you'll be able to attend this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Resch, for this exciting talk that I believe tackled so many questions to all of us. And in all these issues that you have raised concern us all, about the digital, the virtual transformations, about the linked open data, transparency, collaborations, ownership, exposure, sustainability, and trust issues. So I believe there might be several questions.
Happy to answer.
Nikki Zironi, our colleague, would like to transmit her thanks and congratulations for a very thoughtful,
very nice to see you, Nikki,
and inspiring presentation. And she mentions that we will all benefit from her thoughts and experience in the field of digital humanities. Oh, Nikki.
Hello, thank you very much.
Good to see you.
Great seeing you too. And really, you never cease to be inspiring. It was a wonderful talk, and I think that you have raised issues that are far beyond the practicality of digital humanities. It was mostly philosophical, I would say. And I think that you have put things in the right context and, you know, in the big picture. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. You're welcome. It's an exciting time for me. I feel that I've been sitting on the beach waiting for people to turn up. And suddenly, particularly this year, they've all turned up saying, oh, by the way, this digital stuff, perhaps we should try.
True. Thank you.
Μπορώ να ρωτήσω κάτι εγώ?
Βεβαίως, ναι, κύριε Γκάσπαρη.
So I thank you very much for your lecture, full of questions indeed.
Yes.
I would like to make a very simple question. You correctly underlined the unreliability or the credibility of among the humanists about the online publication or digital tools. Do you think that this has changed already, is changing nowadays? Or do you believe that is going to change? Because I was very concerned about the issue when I work on such digital tools with such an effort, so many time and so many money about all these digital tools. If this will be a credible research tool, not for the public or for education, but I'm concerned about the researchers. Do you think that this is going to change?
Well, I think it seems to me that I've spent the last 30 years waiting for change. And one of the things I've learned about change is that it doesn't actually come in a straight line. It doesn't just go in a slope like that. It goes in steps. And you actually, it's a bit like when you have small children. You know, they don't, very often they'll just go from one stage to the next stage quite sharply, not in a gradual way. You didn't realize they were going to be able to do this next thing. And what I find with these changes in the whole approach to the digital is that it's happening like that. It's happening in a very jerky way, very jumpy. But I think the other thing, which is really, really difficult for humanists, is that we are very bad at dealing with negative answers. We don't write books which say, I've looked into all of this and I've discovered that this hypothesis is not true. We're much happier writing books saying, here's a wonderful hypothesis and it is true. Humanities tend to be very positivist in that way. And I think that one of the challenges in all this development of tools and things at the moment is that some of the time, not all of it is going to be, we're not going to get it all right first time. And that's something, the scientists work with that all the time. They do an experiment and they see a negative result as a useful thing. And we're not so well placed to do that, and we have to help. Of course, it's mostly just about the rhetoric that you use in talking to the people who give you the money. But it is important to think about that side of things, about being prepared to say, well, I tried doing it this way, and I've spent 2 years trying to do it this way, and actually I was wrong. Which is why, of course, endlessly communicating with other people. One of the things I've found is that when I've been going around giving talks about doing digital stuff and organizing workshops, if you can get someone to stand up and say, I did this for 6 months and then discovered that it doesn't work. The interesting thing is that there is always someone in the audience who says, oh, I was just going to do that. And we learn infinitely from each other's mistakes. But creating, I can tell you, organizing a workshop at which people are happy to say what they got wrong is not easy. But we have to have that kind of, we have to stimulate that kind of conversation.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Are there any more questions?
You must all be exhausted. It's late in the evening.
We're Greeks.
Well, that's right. But you started quite early too.
Can I just make a very last question? Eventually, aren't any more ones. You were discussing all this collaboration between sharing data, connecting, collaborating, and sharing. I'm in the discipline of numismatics, where I believe.
Very well advanced, of course.
We're very advanced.
Brilliant.
In data, because the object is very easy to describe.
Yes.
The topology is there. There have been some very inspiring people working with linked data.
Yes, exactly.
Society. And what happened is that people that are starting a project regarding coins, it's very easy to receive the basic fields for research. It's very easy to receive data from museums who have digitalized their collection.
Yep.
The main collections are there. So coins, I think, are very much advanced compared to other archaeological objects.
Absolutely. I mean, the coin, all the stuff that Nomisma have been doing, and all over the place. I mean, it's really good. And I suppose, I mean, it's interesting about coins, isn't it? Because coins are themselves replicas.
Yes.
So they are a very particular kind of object.
Exactly, but they're not the exact, I mean,
they're not the same object, but they are.
Many coins were minted.
Yes. I mean, philosophically, it's really, really very interesting. What is the relationship between two coins which are at one level the same? But there was an intellectual and academic structure already in place, which perhaps made it easier for Nomisma to develop its principles. But I think we should also say, we should be happy to say that classical studies in general have been ahead of the game in the world of digitization. And with lots and lots of texts available and all of that. And because we are a relatively small and well-organized intellectual community, but I would say Nomisma is a model to show to everybody and to show to people that you won't lose anything if you share, you'll only gain. And that, you know, epigraphers are not quite as sure about that. There's this, you know, what will happen if I let it out of my hand? You know, I've got to hold on to it. There's this sort of control feeling, but Nomisma is a perfect example of what you can achieve.
I think, and I don't want to monopolize the discussion, but I think what's really interesting is that the numismatists are not that many. So everyone has their own region and area and period of research. So nobody is afraid of action. Everybody wants to share because they want to see what's going on elsewhere. But everybody has their own material, so they are protected in a way from that point of view.
Yes, the coins are still in the places where they are. But the other group, you see, who've been very, very effective are the papyrologists. And again, a very small, contained group of people with a contained group of material, mostly sitting in the papyri, are mostly in museums or libraries. And they've been extremely efficient in coordinating what they do. They've been leading in what can be done. And with other kinds of material, it's taking longer. But it's also the case that archaeologists have been way ahead. Perhaps are archaeologists humanists? Are they scientists? They've always been on that frontier, and they've been well ahead in using these things, partly in their case, I think, because the problem about archaeology is it produces all this data and you don't know what to do with it. I mean, you know, modern archaeology produces far too much information.
Maybe that's a question that we can discuss tomorrow.
Tomorrow, exactly.
Tomorrow afternoon.
Yes.
So let's put a pause in this discussion and we can all continue it tomorrow afternoon. So I would like to thank you all.
Fine.
The keynote speaker and of course the 5 speakers of the earlier session for tonight. Wish you all a very pleasant and relaxing evening and meet you all tomorrow morning. The first session will start at 10 tomorrow morning. So
8 o'clock.
8 o'clock for you. So have
yes.
and
great.